maybe Sharon will join us later. She's a bit minding her own business at the moment, taking it easy up in her shelter. Boy.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today on Zoo School Live. It's me, Marissa, behind the camera today, and we're joined with Keeper Amy here, as well as our elk Carmen, and we do have our female elk Sharon. She's kind of behind the scenes right now. We'll see if she pokes her head out a little bit later. But thanks so much for joining us. Today is the very last episode of Zoo School Live. We're gonna take a little bit of a break, and maybe we will bring Zoo School back again, maybe in the springtime. But for right now, today is actually gonna be the very last day. Be sure to check back in on our YouTube and on our Facebook page to see past episodes, and then we are going to go ahead and get started. So thanks so much for joining us today. Be sure to put any comments inside the comment section, so that way we can go ahead and answer them for you guys. So I'm going to turn it over to Keeper Amy, and she's going to tell us a little bit about who we have here.
All right. I have Carmen. This is our male elk. He's been at the zoo since 2008, and he is about 15 years old right now. Elk are the second largest species of deer, and one of the biggest things we know about deer is that they have antlers. So you may have noticed that Carmen is missing a little bit right now. He actually, we had to remove a part of his antlers because he had a wound right underneath. So he actually is showing you a little bit. He's got a bit of blonde fur. Can I show you? Can I show them? A bit of blonde fur just behind his left antler, and that's actually where the wound has healed. But because the weight of the antlers, these things can weigh about 15 pounds a pop, especially at his age and with the amount of nutrition that he has. So they grow really nicely, and they keep getting bigger every year. So because of the weight of that, we actually had to remove it so that the wound could heal, because otherwise it was putting stress actually on the wound. And then you might ask, well, why didn't you just remove the one and not the other? And well, try holding 15 pounds only on one side of your head. You're going to have a crick in your neck. So we removed both, but he actually sheds these every year and then regrows them. Right, bud? And that's actually the main difference between antlers and horns. Antlers are bone completely and get shed every year, and horns are bone that is attached to the skull, and they're covered in a keratin sheath. These guys don't really have a sheath, and the antlers are actually attached to the skull, by almost like a Velcro of bone, so it breaks off eventually. So he'll shed these normally. The reason we left them as long as we did was so that they would weigh enough to shed. Normally, he usually sheds them end of February, beginning of March, so he'll hold on to them for a while. Eddie, can you present your shoulder for me, bud? I want to work with him just while I have him here. Good job. And he's actually trained to take injections so that he can take at least his vaccines. He's usually not needing much of anything else because he is otherwise a pretty healthy boy. Good. And he's actually training for a little bit of apple right now. I usually use fruit for him because they don't get fruit in the wild, and I loaded you up on fruit, so I'm actually all out. But he is actually so motivated, good job, that he will sit for attention. Good. You're a good man. Yes. So this is the danger. Despite that he is a fluffy dude, he also weighs over 800 pounds, even without the antlers. So when he rubs against this fence, it is a risk actually to have our arms through there with him. That's actually part of the reason he's lined up at the fence like he is, because then he can present his shoulder. He'll just lean against the fence when I ask him to. Right, bud? I'm just going to use my finger now because I don't have a reward, and then I can reach through and do what I need to do without fear of him possibly using his weight in a way that he's not aware of. So what I have here is actually one of my training tools. Don't worry, there's no point on it. We took the tip right off of there, but that way, when we train, we're using the tool that we're going to be using when we do the real thing. So there's nothing new, nothing scary. He's like, oh yeah, that thing that is always here. So that's what we use. It's just a blunted needle. There's nothing in it, and there's no tip on it. So it's not pointy, but it's like, it's familiar, and he gets used to it that way. Boy. Okay, so, as far as their antlers go, though, to go back to that, now I've given you all your fruit that he was waiting there for, they actually shed their antlers. He'll shed his antlers in the very beginning of March and immediately start growing them again. It's almost like the new antler pushes the old antler out, kind of like a baby tooth. So the antler falls. It's a little scabby for a little while, as usually gravity is helping it along, so he's a little sore for a couple days. And then within the first week, he's already got little just nubs. And they're kind of fleshy. It's interesting because they are actually covered in skin called velvet, and it's hairy and it's vascular, so it's got a good blood supply, and it supplies blood to those bones and helps them grow. So when he's really into his growing season, he can grow as much as an inch a day of bone, making antlers the fastest tissue growth in the animal kingdom. And I actually have one of his antlers that we removed this year, so it's got still just a little bit of the velvet on it. I'm going to try not to anger Carmen with the presence of another male elk here, but you can actually see it has a skin cover, and the skin is hairy. And when the antler is done growing, he'll start rubbing it off, which is really what he did here. That's why it's so peely. He was already beginning to rub it off, so on trees, on the ground, on any of the posts in his exhibit. And then, because the whole purpose of their antlers is for defending mates, fighting other males, and protecting their harems against predators, he is then in a very, very sort of riled up state that we call rut. So that's their breeding season, and he will be rubbing his antlers on everything. He'll be rubbing them on trees to shed bark off of them. He'll actually use them to dig in the ground, so he's got a bit of a wallow at the very front of the exhibit that will often fill up with water, and what he will do is make that as smelly as he possibly can, which if you have ever walked past this exhibit in like September or October, it reeks. It's his fault. We're doing what we can, but he's doing that actually on purpose to make it as smelly as possible, and then he'll roll in that to make himself as smelly as possible. And that is basically to attract females.
So you said that he weighed about 800 pounds.
Yeah.
Do you actually weigh him here?
So, we don't. He is also trained to take basically a string around him that has a piece of charcoal on the end, but when we actually had him under anesthesia to remove his antlers, we did wrap basically a tape around him that would normally be used to weigh horses. So the proportions are a little bit different, but he's thereabouts in the 800 to 850 range.
And is that pretty average for a male elk of his age?
So it depends. There's a broad range, especially of the subspecies that are in North America. If he has Roosevelt in him, which we don't know what his lineage is, he might be a mix, he might be pure, but if he is a Roosevelt, that is about average. There are others that are as low as the 500s and 400s into adulthood. But he's also got a very healthy diet. He's been a little bit overweight in the past, so we're also watching him on that, but he's in peak condition.
That's pretty cool. And so you said that there's different subspecies of elk. So is that under the American elk?
So actually elk are found almost all over the world in the northern hemisphere. They're found in North America, they are found in Eastern Asia and parts of Russia, especially in the north. And depending on where you are, they might have a different name. So we call them elk. If you're in Britain or Europe, if you say elk, they're going to think you mean a moose. And that's because that is actually the mostly German word for a moose that we call a moose. And then settlers came to America, saw the elk and said, that looks familiar, and so they called it by the same name. So to be super specific, they're actually called wapiti, which is after the Shawnee and Cree native words, which basically means white rump. So if he does turn around, you'll see that he does have white fur on his back end there, and so does Sharon. And that's pretty indicative of their species. They are a deer species, same thing as white-tailed deer and moose, but these guys are the second largest species.
And so here in Pennsylvania, I know we have an Elk County, Pennsylvania. Are they native to Pennsylvania?
They used to be. There was a subspecies called the eastern elk, but they were actually extirpated, and the very last one was killed in Pennsylvania in 1877. So all of the elk that are actually in Pennsylvania now, like if you go to Elk County or Elk Mountain, are actually reintroduced. So they may have been born there, but I believe our reintroduction program started in the mid-1900s, maybe the 1980s, up in that range of time. So they have all the ones that are here now have been reintroduced from western areas.
Very cool. And does Carmen here have any favorite foods, or what does their diet look like in the wild? I know you said he's eating apples, which he doesn't typically get in the wild.
Yes, in the wild they are mostly grazers and browsers, so they'll be eating whatever grasses that they can get to, and they'll be eating especially fresh shoots off of the trees. And in the winter, when the grazing isn't so good, they'll actually be eating bark and branches as well to supplement their diet. Until they can get to, but they do actually also migrate in the wild. Some of them will follow the grass through the season. So some of them will migrate from like further up the mountain to further down the mountain, or from north to south, depending on where they are. They do mostly live in the woodlands as well, woods and on the edges of woods. So they have sort of a variety of roughage that they can select from.
Does Carmen ever utilize some of his trees in here for snacking?
He does. And these trees, they aren't super great as far as the bark goes, because they're thick trees, it's all rough. But especially when they shed, these oak trees, when they shed their leaves, he will just hoover them up. I will try to get him to train or to shift from one space to the other so that I can clean. And we only go in with, we never actually go in with them. We always go in if there's a barrier between us. So we have 3 sections that we can just sort of musical elk them so that we can get into a space and clean it. But whenever I'm trying to get him to move anywhere, he will just stop and pick up every leaf on the way while they're still good. Most of the leaves in here have been here a while. He's overloaded, and now they're too old, and he's just like, no, I'm over it. But what we also feed them, we feed them hay, obviously, for the grass that they would be getting, but they also get a grain called wild herbivore, and that's basically just like a cereal that is super nutritious for them, so that makes up for anything that maybe the type of hay that we might be giving them might be lacking. Now, as far as training goes, we give them very special treats. So those are things that he would not normally be eating, like fruit, but that is super, super tasty, so that when I need him to train, he knows he's getting something good and he's more willing to come over and participate. So sometimes I will use apples or bananas. Sometimes I'll use peppers, because he doesn't get those very often either, but he's also, oh, this is new, this is interesting.
So in terms of the behaviors that he's trained for, I know here at the zoo we do a lot of training specifically for veterinary procedures. You were doing some injection training a little bit earlier. What other things does he work on in terms of training and husbandry?
So I do have him line up, and most of it is just in the same position as his injections, because then he's pressed up against the fence and I can do whatever. But we're working on getting a blood draw from him, so he will let me touch down his leg and hold off his vein and poke at it with the blunted needle, just to get him used to that. He actually had an injury a little while ago that we don't know what he did, but he ended up having a bit of an abscess in his side. So we took care of that, but it did become a hernia because we had to remove a little bit of the tissue. So he actually allows me to check that to make sure that it is doing okay, and it is smaller than ever, I'm happy to report.
Great. And how old is Carmen?
Carmen is 15. He's been around for a while. In the wild, these guys, their normal lifespan would be anywhere from 8 to 13 years. In captivity, it's closer to 20. And our Sharon's mother, actually Mary, lived to be 21 before she passed away, so she was pretty old. So he's getting up there, but he's not quite a senior yet, so we've got him for a few more good years.
Pretty cool. And it looks like Sharon did come out.
She did. Sharon is Carmen's daughter, as well as Mary. She was born at the zoo here, and you would think that that would mean that she is so comfortable and confident in what her keepers are doing, but no, she's actually extremely suspicious of us all the time. Anything that's new, she just has to judge us for. She's very pretty, so as keepers we kind of like to joke that she's just kind of judging us for being lesser beings. She will train once in a while. We're mostly working on injection training with her, but whether or not she participates is usually more of a toss-up, because sometimes she's just better than us and doesn't feel like interacting. Exactly. So she was born here to Mary and Carmen. She's lived here her whole life, and we've just increased the amount of space throughout the time that she's been here.
Very cool. And does she have any favorite snacks?
She will take bananas now and again. So we have this sort of a cookie that they make for horses that they call it like a German horse muffin. And she loves those. It's got a little bit of sweet grain in it. It's got some molasses. She absolutely loves them. But that is like a candy bar, so she only gets them very sparingly. But she hoovers those up. She loves them. Bye, Sharon.
Very cool. So guys, remember, if you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and put those in the chat, and I'll go ahead and take a peek to see if you guys have commented anything yet. I don't see any comments yet, so be sure to put those in that chat, and we will have our elk keeper Amy answer anything. Now's the time to ask. Thanks again, guys, for tuning in for our very last Zoo School Live of the season. We really appreciate all of your support throughout the past several months as we've launched our Zookeeper Camp Keeper over the summer, and our Zoo School Live program as well. You guys have really shown up and checked us out, which has been really cool. We really appreciated all your questions and comments. And thanks to Royal Farms again for sponsoring this episode today. We're really excited to have them partner with us on this episode. And thanks again, guys. If you have any other questions, be sure to please put them in our chat. Now, if you guys missed out on any of our previous episodes, you can view those on our YouTube channel, Elmwood Park Zoo, or you can view them on our Facebook page as well. All of our old episodes are up and able to be viewed. So thanks again for checking us out and sticking with us. Oh, Rhonda says thank you for taking such great care of all the animals. Thanks so much for watching us, guys. We really appreciate it. Have a wonderful rest of your Thursday, and be sure to stay tuned. Wild Lights will be starting soon here at the zoo. We are open, and you guys are definitely welcome to come hang out with us here at the zoo and come see Carmen in person. All right, guys, have a great day. Thanks again for watching. Bye.